What is going on, Stallions? Welcome to the Gamer Heaven, where we focus on the past, present, and future of gaming. Cyberpunk 2077 truly is a gorgeous game when you have ray tracing cranked on to let Night City shine. However, it's pretty resource intensive, so I'm going to explain graphics settings top to bottom, which settings take a massive performance hit on your GPU, and which ones don't make a dang bit of difference. Spoiler alert, it's almost all of them. Without further ado, let's get CP77 looking good on your rig, boys. Alrighty boys, so the information in this video is a combination of my personal experience playing this game for the last 2 months, with a 3080 and a 10th gen i7. Prior to that, I was on a 2060 Super and a Ryzen 3600X. And then also a lot of the information that I am going to cover in this tutorial I actually got from this article right here at PC Gamer. They have some really good information here, and this article will be cited or sourced in the description below if you want to read it, in case you ever forget any of these settings and you want to re-enter the values. I guess you could just rewatch this video again too, that also works. So my goal for this tutorial is to get it to cater to everyone, the people that want to prioritize fidelity, sheer beautiful graphics, and those that also want to prioritize frames per second and a more fluid experience, as well as people that have very, very low-end PCs that can just barely run Cyberpunk, and then people that are running 3090s and overclocked i10s as well. So I think the most beneficial way for me to go about doing this would be to explain which settings make little to no difference whatsoever, and which settings will give you substantial performance hits or gains depending on the adjustment. And then of course I'm going to share my personal settings, so if you do have a similar or identical rig to me, a 3080 and an i7, you can pretty much mirror my settings and you will get very, very similar results. Alrighty guys, so over here in the settings, I am going to have a separate video going over all the non-graphical settings, so such as controls, sound, interface, key binding, stuff like that. But for this video, this tutorial, we're going to focus strictly on graphics over here. Video is different. You basically select your primary monitor, and I would recommend setting VSync. It actually works pretty decently in this game, unlike Cold War and Warzone, which doesn't work at all. It's broken. You have to turn it off and then set a manual frame rate cap. If you do still want to set a manual frame rate cap in lieu of using VSync or G-Sync or FreeSync, then you can go ahead and just turn this off and then set a manual frame rate cap here. I do recommend not running a uncapped frame rate for two reasons. One, most likely in this game, because it is incredibly resource intensive. Unless you have like a overclock 3090 or something and you're running relatively lower settings, you're probably not going to hit the maximum frame rate of 144 or 260, whatever your monitor is. And two, if you run an uncapped frame rate, it's actually going to strain screen recording and streaming programs like OBS and Streamlabs OBS. So if that is something that you do, like stream or screen record, then it's going to cause a bigger detriment to your system. So you don't want to do that. I would recommend running games in full screen. It seems to be the least resource intensive and also looks the best IMO in my opinion. Resolution, native resolution of your monitor. If you have an HDR monitor, then I would recommend turning high dynamic range on. You don't take much of a performance hit, as it's literally not the game being processed, it's the monitor and the way it reflects, the way it processes. It's how the monitor monitors reflects all of your settings. So over here in graphics, as you see, I have a custom preset over here. Now what I recommend you guys doing is if you have a 30 series or a high-end 20 series card, so a 2070 Super, 2080, 2080 Ti, go ahead and start over here at Ray Tracing Ultra, and then back down settings accordingly, as I'm going to show you guys here. Now I do real quick want to explain that in this game, I prioritize fidelity, best graphical performance for a couple of reasons. One, it's an offline, single-player campaign, MMORPG. Yes, it does have some first-person shooting aspects. However, the gunfights can easily be won, and you can perform well at a frame rate of 60 or above. It's not a competitive multiplayer. It's not Apex Legends or Warzone or something like that, where I'm going to prioritize 144 hertz, and I will take a hit to my graphical performance. This is a campaign with a very, very beautiful, environment with Night City, so I like to see it at its full-blown ray tracing glory. Now, the only caveat to that, I'm not going to run, stunning graphics at 15 frames per second or anything like that. As long as I'm at 60 frames per second or higher, I will run the settings that I do, which, as you guys are going to see, it's basically everything maxed out. But having played this game on a 2060 Super, I was not able to run the settings that I do now, not even close. For a point of reference, the pictures on screen here represent the performance that you're going to get on this game with Ray Tracing Ultra, as you can see, the 3080 is substantially more powerful than even a 2080 Ti at about an average of 20 frames per second higher. But we're going to get you guys all set up, even if you're on an old 1660 Ti or something. Alrighty boys, so jumping right into the action, if you have a high-end 20 series or a 30 series card, you can go ahead and start over here at Ray Tracing Ultra and then back down settings from there. Most likely you are going to want to play this game with ray tracing on, especially if you are using DLSS, which we are going to talk about why you would want to use that at the end of this video here. But you want to start at Ray Tracing Ultra over here, then you can back settings down. Now, the weird thing is about this game, there's about 31 graphical settings in this game, and about 20 of them only make up a 2% difference in performance. So whether you have them at Ultra or off, completely disabled, they make a 2% difference to your frames per second. However, there are a couple that make like 12% FPS advantage or disadvantage just with one setting, so we're going to cover that. Texture quality, one of those ones that really doesn't matter, leave it on high. Field of view, you can set it anywhere from 70 to 100. The default is 80. I didn't notice a performance hit cranking it up, but it also didn't look any prettier either, so I leave it on the default. Film grain, turn this thing off. It doesn't really make a performance hit, but it looks ugly. It's supposed to give you that kind of nitty-gritty look. It doesn't look cinematic. It looks like ass. Chromatic aberration, absolutely turn it off. The images on screen here, the one on the left has chromatic aberration on, the one on the right has it off. This is in a lot of games, even console games. I was just playing Miles Morales. I immediately turned it off because what it does is blurs the outside of the screen in an effort to give you a real cinematic movie look, but really, it's disorienting and it does not look good. Depth of field, this is personal preference. I leave it on. You can turn it off. Same thing with lens flare. It adds those little sunspots and stuff as if you were looking through a camera lens into the world. Motion blur, I go back and forth with this, but usually I leave it off. It doesn't look good in my opinion. Now in most PC games or console games that allow you to adjust graphical settings and sliders, shadows often make a huge difference in your frames per second or your frames per second. So in this game, these shadows here don't make a damned bit of difference whatsoever. Same thing with improved facial lighting geometry. Anisotropy. Doesn't goddamn matter. Leave all of these on high or ultra. They're literally adjusting these is going to make like 2% of difference. Except for local and cascade shadows, these bad boys right here will net you about a 6% gain in your frames per second. Now, distant shadows, turning this from high down to low, in conjunction with ambient occlusion, which I didn't really notice a huge difference in the graphical beauty of the game by turning these off, as they are shadows for items, for objects, very far in the distance. Didn't make a big difference to how the game looked, but it will give you about 4 to 5% boost in your frames per second. So if you're running on low-end hardware, go ahead and turn that on. Now, screen space reflections. Turning this from ultra to off will get you a 12% boost in your frames per second. That's pretty huge, lady. Take a look and take a grip on it. It's a big one. But another thick boy over here is volumetric fog and cloud. So two weather effects that don't really affect the beauty of the game that much. I mean, yeah, it'll take away from some of the immersion of a real weather and day cycle and stuff. But turning these from ultra to low, you're looking at about 11%, boys. That's pretty thick. And again, that's something that you're really not going to miss, but what you will be well welcomed is that extra 11% to your frames per second. Now, if you are on low spec hardware, i.e. a very early generation NVIDIA card, like maybe a 10 series, or you're on an old AMD or something, you might have to turn ray tracing off. And again, if you are trying to prioritize like 144 hertz or 260 hertz or something, I personally don't understand it because this is not a competitive first-person shooter, a BR, or anything like that. It's a MMO RPG that does have some shooting in it. But, you know, for me, I can easily win the gunfights in this game at 60 frames per second or 80, whatever I'm hitting. So, but if you are trying to prioritize frame rate, nothing wrong with that. No judgment here. I don't have a gavel, ladies. I'm not judging you. You can turn that off. As if you're not running DLSS, ray tracing, you're looking at about a 40 to 60 frames per second hit. Wowzers. Now, out of all these effects here, the ray tracing shadows make the least graphical, noticeable difference to your corneas, to your peepers, which is surprising. I just played Miles Morales on the PS5, and the ray tracing on that bad boy, the shadows were really what made the game pop. I took some screenshots in that game, and it looked insane because of that lighting, that ray tracing shadows. Here, it's more so the reflections on some of the neon signs and the vehicles when they drive by, and the way that light kind of bleeds through the environments. As where the shadows didn't really do too much. So if you need to turn off just one of these to get a little extra FPS, turn off shadows. And if you want ray tracing on, but you just can't handle ultra on your rig, not a big deal. You can bump it down to medium. Now, Psycho, it didn't look much prettier than ultra, and I saw frames per a pretty decent FPS hit, about 8 to 10. So I just leave it on ultra, which is the default for ray tracing ultra anyway. I think Psycho is more just for like benchmarking or, you know, schmeckle length showing at the bar or something, bragging rights. Like, yeah, I can run Psycho settings on Cyberpunk at 2 frames per second, bruh. Like, it doesn't really matter to anybody. Now, we are going to talk about the nitty-gritty squeeze-a-titty, DLSS, Deep Learning Super Sampling. So, I'll be the first one to get it right out of the way. The original DLSS 1.0 was absolutely horrendous. It was terrible. It was blurry, blown out. Images look like crap. DLSS 2.0 and all the future versions of it are really good. So good to the point to where in many situations, in several scenes on certain textures, the actual scaled image, the super sampled image, looks better than a native 1440 or 4K image, which is absurd. Sounds like some black magic tomfoolery I'm trying to sell you guys, considering, you know, it's a 1080p or 1440 image that's scaled up to a higher resolution, but it looks better than the native image, which is insane. And I'm not just making this up. There's a ton of journalistic platforms out there like PC Mag and Tech Radar that have done tests on this. Jay's 2 Cents, Linus Tech Tips. I know I'm name dropping left and right, but I got to reiterate to you guys, I got to pound the point home that this is true. DLSS makes a huge difference. And in this game and many other games, we're talking about 40 to 50 frames per second, which is about what you lose by turning ray tracing on. So when you turn ray tracing on, it craps on your frames per second. Then you turn DLSS onto auto, where it can select between quality, balance, or performance on the fly. And you're back up there at basically your normal frame rate as if you had ray tracing off. Now, granted, the RTX or NVIDIA ray tracing is only available on the newer generation card, so like the 20s and the 30 series, but it works phenomenally. Same thing with deep learning super sampling. Now, if you don't have an NVIDIA graphics card, you have an AMD graphics card. You're not SOL or sad old loser or shit out of luck or whatever the kids call it. You have what's called Dynamic Fidelity FX, which is basically DLSS for AMD. Now, the interesting thing is if you do have an NVIDIA card, you can choose, do you want DLSS or Fidelity FX? You can't run both because they do the same thing more or less. It's super sampling, but you can run AMD's version if you turn DLSS off. I personally recommend that if you have access to both, run DLSS. I think it's a little bit better in my opinion. But if you have an AMD card, Fidelity FX will definitely boost your frames per second up. Now, to my knowledge, there is no ray tracing with AMD cards in this particular title yet, but they are talking about getting it implemented as the new 6000 series cards from AMD, so like the 6800 and 6900 XT, they do have ray tracing capability. But a lot of developers haven't really enabled that for them yet. Ooh, boy. I know that was a lot. It was a lot of talking on my part. My lips are pretty chapped from gum smacking and lip flapping, but I gotta say, it's important stuff, and if you use these settings here, and I think it was more beneficial for me to actually explain what all these do and which ones actually have effect, instead of just, I see a lot of, not calling out any other YouTubers or anything like that. That would not be, not great integrity on my part, but a lot of these other tutorials I see, not just on this game, but a lot of graphical tutorials and whatnot, people just like, these are the settings you want right here. Pause the screen, set them up like mine. And you're like, okay. And you set them up and it doesn't look great. And you're like, okay. And then you watch another video and they say the same thing. It's like, if you actually explain to the viewer what these settings do, then they can understand, well, for my rig, this might not actually work. Maybe I'll tweak this one a little bit. So you guys gain knowledge, which I think is more beneficial than me being like, shadows, you don't want them, and then moving on. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, is beneficial for you, shoving a thumb where the sun don't shine, liking the video helps it to get seen by more people, which in turn helps to grow my little channel, as it is a grower, not a shower, and I want this channel to be a big, girthy, thick, veiny rager by the end of this year. Subscribe for more content like this. I do a lot of tutorials helping you get set up streaming and YouTubing, as well as the newest, latest, and greatest news when it comes to the gaming community and industry. And I'll see you Stallions and Stallionettes in the next video. Peace.